My name's Guy Kesterman. I've been a professional bike and kit tester for nearly 25 years, as you well know. And this is a little exclusive for you, which takes me right back in my cycling magazine history to the late, great Mike Hall. That's why it's got the Be More Mike sticker on it, because although most people know him as kind of a pioneer of ultra-distance cycling and organised races like the Transcontinental, he was also a brilliant engineer with a fascination for kind of cracking the holy grail of, well, rear suspension kinematics and performance. And this is the Auckland Cycles Marra. As you can tell, it's very much a prototype bike, but it's based on the early designs of Mike's, which I can remember him riding and crashing quite spectacularly as a teenager when he was my intern on Maximum Mountain Bike magazine in 1999 when he was just 15. So that's how far we're going back. But good friend of mine and mine, Gary Ewing from In Spiral Cycles, up in Wearside, has up near Hampsterley, has been working on and off over the years with all sorts of various designs, and then about a year and a half ago he kind of had the eureka moment with this setup. So I mean, what we're looking at here, I mean, basically we're looking at contra-rotating virtual pivot point. So you've got that linkage swings forwards like that, that yoke drives the shock, that's connected to the rear swing arm. By the way, this is basically hacked together from a very long steel hardtail. There's another chainstay coming up in the back, and he's also done some carbon and alloy drawings and concept bikes, which you might have seen in a pink bike feature. If I can find the link, I shall insert that into the video in high-tech style. But he's also fitted an idler as well, and you can't really see them all, but under there's about 6 different mounts for that upper pivot, for that upper idler pulley, which actually comes off an old high bike e-bike. As Gary says, you know, if you've got stuff lying around, why bother reinventing it? But I mean, you can see the whole bike, it's just full of holes for various shock mountings for different progressions. But the whole idea is to create this virtual pivot rear end with a very sort of pronounced rearward axle path through the early stages of travel. And then it goes to quite a vertical axle path towards the end. And although Gary was thinking, oh, it might be a little too progressive, and so that actually turns out that works really, really well with the air shock it's got fitted, because obviously the kinematic is kind of fighting against compression compared to the start of the stroke. And I've just come back from riding it down the gorge. It was only a quick 20-minute ride, but I'm kind of wishing I'd taken the camera with me, because this thing is dramatic. I mean, obviously I spent a lot of time last year on the Forbidden Druid, and basically this is kind of like that, but on crack. You're still getting quite a lot of anti-squat, so you're getting a really, really positive feel under drive, surprisingly little chain drag, but the most amazingly kind of carefully metered and damped suspension stroke, but also this bottomless 185mm travel rear end matched to the Zeb fork on front. And it's not just that, there's a whole 3D dynamic that this suspension system creates, because it's got a lot of braking effect in the back end. It essentially works like a kind of anti-squat for the front end as well, so you can really haul a big handful of rear brake, and rather than it pitching the bike forwards onto its nose, the whole bike just kind of sits static. So, I mean, like I say, I've literally just ridden it 20 minutes, taken in Stinky Steps and some other local highlights of bike testing history. But yeah, very, very interesting. And I think it's got real potential as well. I mean, Gary's going through, he's just waiting to hear patent protection on it. He's applied for all that kind of thing. There's a couple of people who've kind of, so hopefully he's going to have the whole design ownership locked down very shortly, and then he can push on with creating a sort of more polished production version. Because as you can see, you know, it's got like old spare bottom brackets welded onto the back of the seat tube there to form the pivot arrangement, and the first thing I noticed when I was riding it is it's pretty dramatically on the wonk in terms of alignment, which, it's always good when you pick up stuff like that. But yeah, there's definitely some real potential for a very, very positive pedalling, ultra long travel, ultra well damped, and kind of physically and shock kinematically progressive bike. A lot of very, very, very interesting things going on here, which it would take me a long time and a lot more riding to unpackage. So Gary's just literally swung by for a cup of tea and some cake. Like I say, we went out for 20 minutes, but this is very much just the start of the story for this bike. Gary's already talking to people about tooling up. He's talking to people about carbon. So really, really fascinated to be involved with the project at this early stage. Really, really good. Really delighted that Gary took the time out to drop in and let me have a fly on the bike. And hopefully he'll be back in a minute. He left his sunglasses down where we took some static shots of the bike, so he's just headed off on another bike. So when he gets back, I'm going to grab him and have a quick chat to him about the kind of whole design process behind it.
Hello.
Right, Gary's back. He's found his glasses, so I'm just going to throw some questions at him. Marra, why?
Just northeast. Pit speak, pit language. So Marra, friend. I've got a cross-country version which is going to be called the Reaver. And the Border Reavers were the people who went backwards and forwards over the Scottish borders, killing each other, stealing their sheep.
Yeah, good old old tribal tradition.
So I thought for an enduro bike, you want something that's going to look after you.
Yeah.
And for a cross-country bike, you want something that's going to go fast across bad terrain. So.
Yeah. With cattle on its back. Maybe not. But anyway, how do you describe the suspension system?
COLARP. So it started off... Well, COLARP stands for kind of like a rearward pivot. So the pivot position kind of, that line intersecting with that line, kind of hovers around here somewhere and starts off there early in the stroke and then comes down to about here later in the stroke.
And then okay, so that's way behind where you'd normally put.
Yeah.
I mean, normally you'd have it kind of, forward and just above the main pivot is the normal position, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you get around that with the idler, mostly in terms of the pedalling interaction?
Well, if you look at a standard 4-bar suspension design, the pivot position for that, the floating pivot position is actually, people say that the pivot position is, on a 4-bar linkage, would start about here and end up around about here. But actually, through all of those lines, there's a point where actually a single pivot with a pivot there would approximate the design most closely.
Yeah.
So you could look at a 4-bar suspension design and say it's actually a rearward pivot because you end up with a suspension curve which basically rotates around a point around here somewhere.
But this is a much more dramatic in terms of rear axle path.
Yeah, it goes backwards for the first half of the travel. So as the suspension compresses, the first thing that happens is that comes down.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
And so as that comes down, basically that line straightens out.
Yeah.
So the first thing that happens is that those 3 points, which are not in a straight line, become in a straight line. So
yeah,
suspension goes backwards. When that line has straightened out, then it basically rotates like a normal bike.
Yeah.
So thinking about it, it seemed fun that you'd get the benefit of the rearward axle path when it counted most, which is when everything's going well.
Yeah.
And you're looking to carry speed, which when you're in the first half of the travel. And then when things get meaty and a little bit difficult to navigate, it works, the chainstay doesn't continue to lengthen.
Yeah.
It works more like a regular suspension bike.
Where does that happen in relation to sag, roughly?
In there somewhere.
Right. So it's kind of similar to systems like the Switch Infinity and things like that.
So, I mean,
but
the sag kind of happens just before the suspension tent. So sag kind of works best at around about 20%.
Yeah.
So it's just super the way the kinematics and the linkages work, which is possibly going to be refined. I've got some ideas, but it adds complexity and I'm not sure if it's necessary. But yeah, I'm just because I want to try.
Yeah, there's a nice kind of sync between the progression in the kinematic and the progression in the shock anyway.
Yeah.
Because it kind of resists bottoming already.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens next then? We've got the steel one.
I've got Nathan, my man who can TIG weld, is this week hopefully welding up a shorter rear triangle. So it'd be nice to see how short I can make the chainstays.
Yeah.
And it still ride nicely. So with these pivot points have got top eccentrics in them, so I can lengthen and adjust. And
yeah, shift it all in space essentially.
Yeah, so move it backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
There's plenty of holes I can drill in there, so I can get that right. Make sure it's a blank canvas.
Yeah.
So it's the bit that isn't blank actually seems to work quite
But it's a lot closer than when it was just Lego Technic.
Oh yeah.
On the dining room table, which you were saying that's how it started.
It did, yeah. So yeah, sheet of wallpaper, lining paper, so basically a big sheet of white paper on the dining room table.
Yeah.
Lego Technic in 2-dimensionals on top, and of course you can unpin those plugs and put them in somewhere else, and you put a pen in that hole and you move it and you see where it goes. And then I even had a bit of a wheel for the rear cassette, a wheel for the front idler, and just basically put that in a fixed position.
Yeah.
And put a bit of string across it.
No, nice. Yeah, so you can do approximate chain growth as well.
It's like, hey Fiona, can you hold this piece of string tight at this end when I move this? And I want to see how much it moves.
and it all dates back to Mike Hall's original sort of concepts, in part at least, or at least in inspiration anyway.
Yeah, inspiration. He never told me in any detail what he was thinking or creating.
I'm not sure he ever quite got there, because he was firing ideas at me all the time.
Yeah. I mean, the words that he said to me are kind of like a rearward pivot, and I've carried that forward, calling this the COLARP suspension design.
Yeah.
And he said it's kind of like a rearward pivot URT. Those were his words, and for some reason those have stuck in my head. Yeah. So when I got some spare time, finally in second year of lockdown, it was just like, okay, let's spend some money doing something bonkers.
Well, look, thanks so much for coming around. Showing me the bike.
Love it.
Absolutely fascinating riding it.
Yeah.
But I think genuinely real potential in there.
Thanks.
So,
yeah. I've loved riding it, and it's been doing cross country days, and I'm going to race it Tweed Love in September.
Fantastic.
So
look out for Gary.
Yeah. If my results
and
get
the Marra.
better, then it's definitely down to the bike. Not the ride.
We all need bikes like that in our lives.
Yeah. So, cheers.
Okay, thanks very much, folks. Thanks to Gary. Thanks to the Marra. And definitely keep in touch on this story as it progresses.
Yeah.
Cheers, fella.
Party on.